Okay, now it is recording. Okay, so again, this is the latest in the sequence of webinars that we've been doing to introduce individual topics, and originally in dashboard creation, then we did some data mashup topics, and now we're kind of into report creation topics. And as I always say, everyone who's listening live is muted, so I can't hear you talking or asking questions, but there is a chat box or a question box that you can type questions in, and your questions will pop up on my screen, and I'll be happy to answer questions at any point as we go along, as always. With that said, I guess we can get started. And I'm just double checking that the recording is going, and like I always say, the recording should be posted up sometime beginning of next week probably, and our marketing director will send out a link to the recording on YouTube that you can then share with anyone. So today's topic is adding charts and tables to a report. I believe last month we did a brief introduction to creating a report, so we just looked at kind of the rudiments of creating a new report using our desktop development tool, which is called Style Studio. And it was pretty straightforward. And today we're going to get into a little bit more detail about charts and tables in particular. Now, a lot of this, especially the chart topics, are going to be a bit repetitive or redundant with some topics that we did a year or two ago when we were looking at dashboards. And I'm going to do them here with a little bit less detail than I did then, because there is, if you look on YouTube, if you look in our channel of these webinars, back in 2014, we did a webinar on adding charts to a dashboard, and then there was a separate webinar on adding tables to a dashboard. So as it turns out, creating charts in reports and creating charts on a dashboard are almost identical because the chart editor is the same. A little difference here, a little difference there. This option might be in one place for a report, might be in a different place for a dashboard, but fundamentally creating charts is the same in dashboards and reports. So when I cover the chart section here, it'll probably seem fairly familiar, especially if you had been in that earlier webinar. And if you want more detail on any of the stuff I talk about related to charts, by all means, check out that earlier webinar. I think it ran about an hour, so I suspect it covered there must have been some more detail in there than I'll be able to cover today. As far as the tables go, some of the things I'll cover here are similar to creating tables in a dashboard, but many things are not, because tables in a dashboard are just a different construction than tables in a report. So a lot of the stuff that I'll talk about regarding tables in a report will seem different if you're mostly familiar with adding tables to a dashboard. So having said all that, let's get started, and we'll begin with the chart section. And I have a slide here. This is actually the same slide that I used from that webinar in 2014, creating charts. And I'll see how much of this I can get done. I think what I did then is I just worked through these 4 different chart examples. There are some things that you can do with a chart in a dashboard that are not possible or much more difficult to do in a report. So I'm just going to kind of stay to the stuff that's easy to do in a report chart. So before we get started with these examples, let me just show you again, the fundamentals of creating a chart. So I have open in the background here, I have Style Studio, our desktop development tool. Of course, to launch Style Studio, you would run it like you do any Windows application. You go to your Windows start menu and just find your installation location, which for me is somewhere down here. Right, and there's Style Studio, so I just ran it. I think we did all that last month. And so what I want to do is just show you, again, the basics of creating a chart. So I'll create a new report. I'll press the New Report button in Style Studio. I'll select Blank Tabular Report, which, like I said, there are 2 different types of reports, tabular and flow. The vast majority of reports that people create are tabular reports. What we might do in a later webinar is take a look at reusable report components. One type of reusable report component is a so-called meta template. And if you had a meta template, which is just basically a boilerplate report, then you would see your meta templates listed here as well, and you could create a flow report or a tabular report based on a predefined template. But right now we only have these options. So I'll just create blank tabular report. And to add a chart, I can go to the toolbox panel on the left and either click on a chart or just drag a chart into the report page. Okay, so there's a chart, it's a blank chart, and when I do that on the left side, in the left panel, I get the chart editor, right? And again, for those of you who are familiar with creating dashboards, but perhaps not familiar with creating reports, the chart editor is essentially identical to the chart editor that you have when creating a dashboard. There are some, pardon me, there are some slight differences. For example, in a report, you have access to all of the data sources defined in the system, right? So here I have my order model. I also have all my sample queries and so on. When you're doing a chart in a dashboard, you don't have access to all of the data sources that exist in the system. You have only access to the data source on which the dashboard is based, right? When you create a new dashboard, you select a data source to base the dashboard or the view sheet on, right? And that's the data source that the chart can draw data from. In a report, it's different. A report, a particular chart can draw data from any available data source. So that's a bit broader capability. And that's true of other report components as well. So the first thing that you would do is you would, well, I'll just illustrate. I'm going to begin by adding a measure, right? So I'm going to, on this chart, I want to display the aggregated total. So I'll find our order model here, and I'll find the product total field. So there it is. And what I want to do just to start off is just show you how a chart aggregates data. So I'll drag that total field into the Y region. That's kind of the standard, I guess the standard chart would have the measure on the Y-axis. Of course, it need not be, but I'll drop it there, right? And what that does is it gives me a chart with one bar here. There's only one bar because I haven't specified yet any grouping, any breakdown by any other field, so I just get a single bar. Now what I'm looking at here is actually metadata, because by default a report, as you'll recall from last time, a report displays data, does not display data by default, but rather displays only metadata. If you want to see the actual data in a chart or in any other report component, you have a couple of choices. Either you can preview the report by pressing the preview button, or it looks almost identical, except you can see that the numbers have changed, right? So this is the real data now. Now I'm back in the design view. You can see the numbers here are just representative, they're just kind of placeholder numbers. The other approach is to use the live edit button, which is right next to the preview button. So you press that guy, right, and then it will display the live data in the design view. So I'm going to work that way with live edit. And so you can see that right now I've got just a single group because I haven't specified any further breakdown. And it's showing me that my grand total, my summed product total is, somewhere, between $15 and $20 million. Okay, so that's just pure aggregation, just aggregating a single field without any further breakdown of that field into groups. Not very interesting. Usually what you want to do is you want to introduce some kind of groups into your chart. And so what I can do is I can break this down by year. And one way to do that is to put the year on the x-axis. So I'll find my date field. So here it is, order.date, drag that to the X region here. Okay, and that introduces a breakdown by year, right? So you can see now on the chart, 2013, 2014, 2015, 2016. What if I wanted to break it down, let's say by month or by quarter, something like that? That's just as simple as changing the grouping level. So what I would do is I would come over here next to the order date field, press the edit dimension button, it's that little calculator button there, and just change the level field to, let's say, I don't know, month. Right, and press the apply button, and then I'll get a breakdown by month. Right, so that's how you adjust the breakdown for a date grouping field. Okay, so let me put it back to year, which is the default breakdown. Okay, so this is now kind of a more typical chart. We've got a measure that we're aggregating on the y-axis, and we've got a grouping on the x-axis. Now you can also group by color or by shape or by size. Basically what that does is instead of defining the different groups using different positions on the x-axis, it uses one of those other modalities, color, shape, size, or text label. So for example, I could take this date field here, order.date, which is currently on the x-axis, and drag it to the color region here. And then instead of using position on the x-axis, it would use different colors to distinguish those different years, right? So you can see I just put the date field on the color region in this visual panel at the bottom. And in fact, you could do both of those at the same time. For example, I could have the dates distinguished, the date groups or the year groups distinguished by color and also by position on the x-axis. To do that, I would just grab the date field again from here, up top, grab the date field, put it on the x-axis as well as in the color region. And then you can see it decided to change that to a point type chart, but I can force it by using the select chart style button here. I can force it back to a bar chart. And then you can see that I've got essentially the same grouping using two different modalities, using the position on the x-axis to define the different groups and also using different colors to define the different groups. If you want to change the colors, what you would do is you would go down to the color region here, press the edit button. There's a little pencil button there, and then you can choose the different colors that are used to represent those different groups. Right? So you would do that by pressing one of these color chips and by choosing the color that you want for this first group, the second group, and so on. Okay, let me remove the color, and we'll just take a look at one more thing, and that is just in terms of making this kind of very basic chart. Let's just illustrate how we can put a second measure on this chart. So what I'll do is I want to represent quantity purchased also. Right now I'm representing the product total using the height of the bars. So I'm going to put the quantity purchased. I can put it on the y-axis also, right? So now I've got two measures on the y-axis. Pardon me. And so by default I get two separate axes, right? And I get a little legend here that distinguishes the two measures. I can also put the two measures on the same axis, and the way I would do that is by pressing this middle button here, switch to single graph. Right? Now the two measures, the total and the quantity, are on the same axis, the same y-axis. Problem is that the quantities are much less than the total, so if I wanted to do things this way, then probably what I would want to do is introduce a secondary y-axis. Right? So what I would do then is I would do switch to single graph like this, and let me just, I'd have to do multiple styles. And then I could choose that, for example, I want, whoops. Oh, I wonder if, I'm not sure I need to do multiple styles. Let me just back out of that for a second. Confusing myself. No, I don't need to do multiple styles. So what I can do is press the Edit Measure button next to the measure that I want to display on a secondary axis, then just select Secondary Axis, and that will basically put that measure then over towards the right. All right, so there's the quantity purchased measure, aggregated measure labels are on the right, and the sum total aggregated measure labels are on the left. All right, so that's one way to deal with multiple measures that you want on the same plot area, but that have magnitudes that are not really commensurate with each other, so you can handle that by using a double axis like that. Okay, another thing that I can do is, let me just turn that off and put this back the way it was. I can also use color, just like we did a moment ago to represent the date dimension using color, using different colors for the different years or different months or whatever. I can do the same thing with a measure. I can use color to represent the values of a measure. So for example, I can grab this quantity purchase field and drag it down to the color region here, drop it in there, and then what happens is that the aggregated total is still being represented by the height on the y-axis, right, like it was originally, but now I've got this quantity purchased measure being represented by a change in color, right? So maybe it's better if I set this back to a bar type chart to make that color shift a little bit more obvious. And there you can see that, you know, the different bars have slightly different colors, indicating the aggregated quantity purchased for each of those years. So that's just some of the basics of creating a chart. Let's get on to those examples then. And of course, if there's any question, feel free to let me know. Like I said, I'm going to kind of speed through some of these examples here just to give you a sense of some of the things that you can do with charts. And the reason that I'm going to go a little bit quickly is, again, because these examples were covered in a previous webinar. So the first example here is an illustration of using multiple dimensions and multiple measures. It's the year up at the top here on the x-axis. We've got the category dimension on the bottom, and then we've got product total and also the average order discount and the quantity purchased, and color distinguishing another dimension, which is the customer region. So let's just see how we would rig up a chart like this. There's a lot of stuff going on. Whoops. But it's not as where's my, there it is. It's not as complicated to do. It's just a bunch of steps. So I'm going to delete the chart that we just did, and I'll start anew by adding a chart again to this blank report. Incidentally, you can resize a chart by dragging on the handles here. You'll note that one difference between reports and dashboards is that when you add a chart into a dashboard, basically you have a completely open canvas. You can move that chart anywhere around. When you're designing a report, basically charts and other components kind of just fall into location in a particular flow on the report page. So the chart is here, there's an insertion point up here. If I move the insertion point down below the chart and then add another chart, the next chart will appear below the first chart. And you can resize a chart, but you can't really drag it around on the page per se, unless you put the chart inside a section. I'm not going to go into that, but I just want to illustrate that there are, as far as positioning charts and things like that, there are differences between reports and dashboards that are just kind of fall out of the fact that reports are based on pages, whereas dashboards are not. So anyway, I have this chart, and what I want to do is I want to add a couple of dimensions, in fact 3 dimensions. So I'll find my data source, which is again the order model. And the first dimension I want on the x-axis is the product category. So I'll find product category, put that in the x region. The second dimension I want is the date. So I'm going to grab the date field, also put that in the x region. Right, and I'll put it above the category. So I've got date and category in that order on the x-axis, and you can see that that puts the date along the top, categories on the bottom. That's the way that I want it. If I wanted it the other way, with the categories on top and the dates on the bottom, I would just reverse the order of these fields over here. We also want the customer region to be distinguished. This is another dimension. We want the customer region, which is somewhere over here. There it is, to be distinguished by color. So I'm going to add customer region into the color area in the visual panel at the bottom. That gives me a legend here, and that will distinguish the 2 regions in the data. Okay, so far I don't have a measure of any kind, just a bunch of dimensions, so this is really not a very interesting chart. Let's start adding some measures, and I want this chart to be a point type chart. So before I do that, I'll press the Select Chart Style button over here and just switch it to a point type chart. Okay. There's no visible change yet, but now this is going to be a point type chart. And so the measures that I want are, first of all, I want the total on the y-axis, kind of a traditional type chart. So I'll find the total field, put that on the y-axis. Right, so there's product total, summed product total on the y-axis. And then additionally, I want the average discount to be represented by the fill of the point. All right, so I'm going to find the discount field. Here's order discount, and I'm going to put it in the shape region here. All right, so for a point type chart, when you add a measure to the shape region, basically what that does is it uses that aggregated measure to control the fill of the point. Now the reason that I point that out is that different types of charts behave differently. So for example, when you add a measure to the shape region, if it's a bar type chart, that will behave differently. That will basically use the fill of the bar to represent the magnitude of the aggregated measure. Right? Whereas if you have a point type chart like we have, then it uses the fill of the point, right? And it also behaves differently whether you, of course, use a measure or a dimension, right? So adding a measure over here, like we're going to do, for a point type chart, like I said, it controls the fill level of the point, right? The fill of the point. If we were to add a dimension over here, it would control the shape of the point, right? So then it would use different shaped points to represent the different values of the dimension. So anyway, these are all things that you have to play with when you're building your charts. Different things work in different ways depending on the context. So I'll grab the discount field, drag it down to the shape region here. You can see that what it does is, again, it's the aggregated discount, which is right now the summed discount for each group, is being used to determine the fill of the corresponding point, the fill level. Now, it doesn't really make sense to sum up the discounts because these discounts are percentages, so summing percentages for a group doesn't really make a lot of mathematical sense. What would make more sense would be to represent the average discount for the group. So in other words, the average discount for, let's say, the category of graphics in the year 2013, that would be somewhat meaningful. So to change that, I just press the Edit Measure button here, and I'll just change the aggregate property to average. All right, so instead of sum, just change that to average. And you won't see much change in the chart, but now if you look at the legend, you can see that these percentages, previously they were reading something like 400, 600, 800%. That doesn't really mean a lot. Now that I changed it to average, they read a little bit more reasonable, that it tells me that, for example, in the largest cases, we're looking at, 4% average discount for that particular subgroup, right? So that's meaningful. Okay, and then lastly, the last measure that I want to add is the summed quantity for each group, and I'm going to represent that by the size of the point, right? So right now all these points are the same size. They have different fills representing the different discounts, but I want to use the outside, basically the circumference of the point, or the radius of the point, to represent the quantity purchased. So I just grab the quantity purchased field and drag it down to the size region in the visual panel, right? And now I've got these different size points where the size of the point gives me the summed quantity purchased for that particular group. Okay, and that's basically the chart. Now obviously it's a little bit cramped over here. There's a couple of ways that we can handle that. One way is to, of course, change the page orientation, right? So I could go with a, for the page setup, I could go with a landscape layout, right? That gives me a little bit more space. I can expand the chart, to utilize that space. That looks a little bit better. Another thing I can do is I can move the legend down below the chart or above the chart, or, somewhere else, or, remove the legend entirely, although that probably would not be advisable, because if I remove the legend, then it's going to be difficult to interpret. You won't be able to know what the what the sizes or the fills mean, because that's what the legend tells you. But what I can do is, to move the legend, I can right-click on this chart and go to Properties. Right, and this has a bunch of tabs over here. So there's a Chart tab over here, and then the Chart tab is kind of a click and drag environment. So I can just click on the legend and just drag it down below the chart. There's a green outline that shows me where it's safe to drop it over there. All right, so that moves the legend down to the bottom. Press OK. All right, so now the legend is down at the bottom, gives me a little bit more space for the chart itself. All right, and then finally, if you notice in the example on the slide here, there's only 2 years shown. So of course that's another strategy that you could do, is just to limit the data, right? So if I was faced with a situation where I'm just displaying too much data and it's unwieldy, I can always introduce a filtering condition on the chart. Right, so I can right-click on the chart, select condition, and say, for example, that order date is, let's say, in range of the past, maybe the past 12 months or something like that, last 18 months. Right, so that will limit the data on the chart, and then that ends up giving me just 2015 and 2016. Probably only part of 2015. Right, so I'd want to be careful how I do that. Right, if I do the past 18 months, that's not necessarily going to capture an entire year. So then, I might, without knowing it, I might be comparing a full year against part of a year. But anyway, that's, hopefully self-evident. So anyway, that's just a quick version, a quick approach of how you can create this type of chart. If you wanted to control the colors, let's say for the region, if you're not happy with those two kind of drab colors, what you would do is you would find that region field here in the color region, and again, you press the edit button, and that allows you to select the colors that you want. So if if I wanted to select like a baby blue for the first region, and let's say a intense red for the second region, I can add, I can either press the other button here to get a big color picker, and that I can pick an intense red color over there, or I can also, if I want to, I can enter a hexadecimal code here. Right, FF0000, how many zeros did I just say? 0000 is pure red. So that's, if that's what I want, that's fine. If I wanted to change this blue to a pure blue, I could do 0000FF. Red, green, blue is pure blue. Oops. There it is. Right, so pure blue, pure red. That should make the colors a lot more popping. So anyway, so you get the idea. So that's how you create that example chart. And again, it's just an illustration of using many dimensions here, 3 different dimensions, and I think we've also got 3 different measures, the total, average discount, quantity purchase, so altogether 6 dimensions and measures on a single chart. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. Again, if there's any questions as I rip through these examples, just feel free to shout them out. The next one is just an illustration of kind of creating what's called a grid of charts, also called a facet chart, I think, where you have kind of multiple individual charts, right? In this case, it's pie charts, and basically what we're looking at is a breakdown by employee. Here it's called Team Sue and Team Robert, and a breakdown by region, and then a further breakdown in each chart by category. So let's see how we would rig up something like that. Again, just trying to expose you to a variety of different techniques here for charts. So I'll add a blank chart. And I'll begin by creating a single pie chart. So that would be the measure on the pie chart is, I believe, the total. So I'll find again, I'm going against the our order model, sample order model every time just for convenience here. So I'll grab the product total, throw that onto the y-axis, and then I'm going to switch the chart type to a pie type chart. So press the select chart style button, select the pie type chart. Nothing very interesting yet. All right, so product total on the y-axis. Now the slices of the pie are going to correspond to different categories. So I'll grab the product category field, and I want those slices of the pie to be distinguished by color. So I'm going to put that dimension, the category dimension, in the color region here. Drag it down to color. All right, so there's my basic pie chart broken out by category. If you wanted to display the actual values, you could do that. I'm going to, there's actually an option if you want, well, just, you can do that either by using the text region down here, so you can find the total field and put it in the text region, right? So that will display values on the pie chart. Another approach is if you right-click on the chart, go to Properties, and click on the chart in the chart properties, there's an option here called Show Values. That will also display the values on the pie chart. So either of those approaches. In this case, I'm not going to do either of them. I'll just leave it, kind of naked like that. But the next thing I want to do is I want to do this further breakdown by region, right? So how would I do that? Well, in the picture, we've got the region, the different regions on this top x-axis. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to grab the region field and put it on the x-axis over here. All right, so there I've got USA East and USA West. And then the last breakdown that I have is by salesperson name. Now, you'll notice in this example over here, we've got Team Sue and Team Robert. In fact, we don't have those teams right now set up in the data. All we have are the individual salespeople given to us by a field called salesperson first name over here. So what I can do is I can just break it out by salesperson first name, drag the first name field down to the Y area, the Y-axis, right? Even though I've already got a measure there on the Y-axis, that's fine, right? So I can also add a dimension, right? So here I've got this dimension called salesperson first name on the Y-axis together with the measure product total, right? And that's totally fine. That puts the, in addition to aggregating the measure, it also breaks out the dimension on the y-axis to create, again, the so-called grid or facet chart. And what you'll notice is that these particular salespeople, each one only has sales in a particular region. So Sue only has sales in the region USA East. That's why we've got a blank area here. Now, if we wanted to do the type of thing that we see in the picture, again, and have kind of these, these broader categories, Team Sue and Team Robert. So let's say Team Sue is Sue and Annie, and Team Robert is Robert and Eric. What we could do is we could just create a derived column, essentially an expression field or a scripted field that creates those groups. So I'll just do that very quickly. In a dashboard, it's actually easier because you can just merge the different labels together. In a dashboard, you can just click on the different labels and say, for example, that you want Sue and Annie or Sue and Eric to form a named group, and that will instantly create that group. Here we have to take a little bit more of a detour to do that if we want to. but it'll be quick, so I'll just do it very quickly. And what I'll do is I'll create a new calculated field, right? So just right-click on order model, select, right? That's our data source. Right-click on the data source, select calculated field. I'll call it team. Right? That's going to be the name of this new field that I'm creating, and I'm going to write a little JavaScript. So I press the edit button next to the script option. And my script is basically just going to be if, and there's a field here called salesperson first name. If salesperson first name is equal to Annie, or salesperson first name is equal to, let's say, Sue, then what I want to return here is the string team Sue. And then I'll say else team Robert. So hopefully, my point here is not to get into JavaScripting, although I think the logic here is simple enough, right? If the if for a given field in the a given row in the raw data here, if the salesperson first name is Annie, or if the salesperson first name is Sue, then in this new field that we're creating, we want that that particular row to have a value of team Sue. Otherwise, if it's and what would be otherwise? Otherwise would be Robert or Eric. Those are the only other two salespeople. Then we want to return in this new field that we're creating, this expression field called team. We want to return the value team Robert. Yeah, so it's very kind of basic JavaScript. Hopefully I got it right. Press OK. All right, and then you can see that in my data model here shown down at the bottom, there's this new field called team. And basically this new field called team should have just two values, either team team Sue or team Robert. And what I can do is in place of the salesperson first name, I can use this team field. So I'll just replace salesperson first name on the y-axis with this team field. And then you can see that I get those two values, team Sue and team Robert. If you look back at that webinar that we did in 2014 for the dashboard when we did this example, I'm pretty sure I did not do it that way, but that I did it the easier way, which was just using the named or custom grouping for a chart in a dashboard. But anyway, it might be interesting for you to do a comparison when you have time. Okay, so that's that chart. Again, feel free to ask questions. Maybe I'll do one more chart, and then we'll get on to tables. So that I don't miss the tables entirely. So last example of an interesting kind of chart is one that illustrates chart calculations, and that's this one over here. And basically what we're showing here is there's only one measure here, and that's the aggregated total, but it's being displayed in two different ways. On the bottom part of the chart here, the bottom y-axis is being displayed as a running total, right? So basically every month gets added to the previous month's total. So you see this accumulating total, and then it gets reset at the beginning of the year. Right? So that's the bottom part here. We've got this running accumulating total. And then the top part shows the percent change from the previous month. Right? So these are percentage values, and for every month it shows me whether I've got a positive change from the previous month's sales or a negative change, and we're showing the negative changes in red. Right? So this is going to be just a simple example of doing chart calculations, and then we'll just skip that last example, which is an illustration of doing target lines. If there's time at the end, we could come back to it, but I doubt there will be. But anyway, if you're interested in that, look up in the documentation target lines, and you'll see examples of doing that. So let's do the example of the chart calculation. So I'm going to remove that chart, add a new chart, and what I'll do is, first of all, add the dimension, which is going to be the month. It's the date field broken out by month on the x-axis, so date on the x-axis, broken out by month. And then I want the total. I want to represent the total field in two different ways, so I'm going to put the total field twice onto the y-axis. So I'll find the product total, drag it once onto the y-axis, and then drag it a second time onto the y-axis. So I've got the total measure here displayed twice on the y-axis. Now you don't see it twice on the chart because the chart is intelligent enough to know that right now these are identical, completely identical, and there's no there's no real purpose in displaying two completely identical measures separately, unless you want to give your user the sense of that they have double vision or something like that. But as soon as we make a change to one of these aggregated measures, then it will break them out separately. So let's do that, and let's do that by changing well, let's first do it by changing the chart style. So I'm going to press the Select Chart Style button here, and I want to have different styles for the different measures. So I'm going to select the Multiple Styles option down here, Multiple Styles. And then for the top product total measure, I want to use a bar type style. And then for the bottom product total measure, that's going to be displayed on the bottom part of the chart, I'm going to use a line type style. And you see it still didn't break them out separately. So let's go a little bit further, and let's change the calculation method. So for the top measure, which I don't see on the top yet, oh, it's interesting, it actually resets. So let me do the calculation method, and then we'll do the chart style. So for the one that I want on the top, I want that to be represented as the percent change from previous. So what I'll do is press the Edit Measure button next to that measure, and down in the Calculate area here, select percent from previous. That means the percent change from the previous group, which in this case is from the previous month. Right? So select percent from previous. If you want to reset, you can press the Edit button here and select, oh, interesting, where's the reset? Oh no, I'm sorry, I don't want to reset for the percent, I'm thinking of the running total. Cancel that. So yeah, all I need is percent from previous, press the Apply button. Right, so now now it breaks them out separately, and on the top here I've got percent change from previous. Now I can change that to a bar type chart for the top. Right, so there's percent change from previous. And then for the bottom, I want that to be the running total. So for this bottom measure, I'll press this bottom product total measure, press the Edit Measure button there. From Calculate, select running total. And if I want the reset to occur at the beginning of each new year, press the Edit button and select Reset at Year. Right from there, press OK, press Apply. All right, and so there's my running total on the bottom. And so basically this is the chart that we want. The only thing that's missing here, I can move if I want to move the legend down to the bottom, of course I can again do that. Right-click, Properties, move the legend, so I can see the whole width of the chart. And the last thing that I'm missing is the highlight on the top part of the chart where I show the top bars in green and the bottom bars in red. Well, to show the top bars in green, I can just set the static color. So I'll just show all the bars in green initially, and the way that I can do that is I can over here click to select. You see that I'm clicking in between these two arrows here in the visual panel to select the measure that I want to style. Right, so in this case it's the percent change from previous. You can also click those arrows to cycle through different measures. Right, so percent change from previous, and the color I'm just going to set to a bright green. So something like 00FF00 should be pure green. All right, so now I've got, that doesn't look that great, but I'll just leave it as it is. So I've got these, all the bars in green, and then I'm going to add a highlight that represents the negative bars, the bars that fall below 0 in red. To add a highlight, what I do is I click on the chart. Whoops, I click twice. So just click once to select the data on the top part of that chart. Click on a bar, and then go down to Highlight, the Highlight tab at the bottom. This is similar to, you could do the same thing in a dashboard. The interface is different though. In a dashboard you would right-click on the chart and select the Highlight option. In a report you click on the chart, you select the data on the chart, and then in the panel at the bottom you set up the highlight, but otherwise functionally it's the same. So press the New button, give it a name, less than 0, press OK. Specify that I want the foreground to be styled red, and set a condition by pressing the Edit Condition button here, and the condition is going to be percent change from previous is less than 0. Okay, so whenever the percent change from previous on the chart is less than 0, I want those bars to be filled with red. Press OK, press Apply, right, and there it is. Right, so this is the chart that we built that has it's just a single measure, like I said, but it's represented using different chart calculation methods. On the top, using a percent change from previous calculation method, on the bottom using a running total with reset calculation method. Okay, that's it for the charts because we're already well into our webinar here, so let's get on to the tables. Of course, if there's any question, just feel free to type, chat, let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on and we'll see what see which tables we can get through over here. The first table is an example of just a detail table. The second table is an example of a crosstab, and the third table is an example of kind of an advanced crosstab that uses what in the dashboard world we would call a freehand table, but here we call it a formula table that kind of goes beyond what you can do with a regular crosstab. If I don't get to this, it's not a huge deal. We'll cover formula tables probably in a later webinar. So let me see if I can take a look at these first two tables. And like I said, there are aspects of tables that are quite different in reports than in dashboards. In fact, in a report, a table is a much more sophisticated kind of thing because it can do grouping and aggregation as well as other things. In a dashboard, a table doesn't really do that. When you put a table in a dashboard, it's just, you drag the fields into the table and you get what you get. You can do a lot more in a report with a report table, so I'll try to show you a little bit of that power. So let's do the first example here, just a very simple detail table with a highlight. So I'm going to remove the chart, and let's start building a table. As I pointed out last time, last month's webinar, there are several different ways to build a table. Pardon me. One way to do it is to drag in a table like this. You get a blank table, and then you can start, dragging fields into the table. Right. So that's, that's one way to build a table. Something like this. You add some fields in. All right, so you're building up a table that way. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is, if I can just delete this guy. If you have a query or let's say a data worksheet data block that you want to be represented as a table in its entirety, you can also just drag that in. So let's just as an example, let's say I have a query like fast go game. I can just drag that whole query in to the report, and that will give me a table with the data from that query. So that's another quick way to set up a table. And those I would consider to be kind of special cases, because the more general way that you would usually set up a table in a report is by using the table wizard, because it's kind of has a logical layout that makes, if you're doing something more than just a very simple table, makes it easier. So to access the table wizard, what you do is you click, rather than dragging on the table component, you click on the table component once, and it opens up this data binding window, which has a bunch of features that a bunch of tabs that you can walk through to set up a table. So in this case, what we want to do is just a detail table. So we're not going to do any grouping and summary. We'll skip that tab, but I'll show it to you. What you do is you first select your data source. Again, this is going to be our order model. Then you go to columns. You select the columns that you want in the table. In this case, it's going to be the product category, the product name, the order date. I'm just double clicking these fields to add them. Customer company, customer city, customer state, and the order total, the product total. Okay, now if you wanted to add an additional field here that you actually don't have in your data source, in other words, an expression field or a derived field, you can actually create that. There's an FX button here that allows you to to write a script, either SQL or JavaScript, to define a new column that you can also add into the table, but we'll skip that for now. So I've defined the fields that I want in the table. There's a condition tab here. You can specify a limiting condition to restrict the data in the table. Of course, you can also do that after the fact, so we're not going to bother with that. If you want to add grouping and summary to a table, if you know initially that you want to do that, this is a very good place to do it because it's very logically laid out. So if you say, yeah, I want to group by category, and I want to aggregate, for each category I want to aggregate the totals, very easy to set that up here, and you can also specify some other features, the sort order, and whether you're going to have top end ranking or not. So this is a nice place to, if you know going in all the, exactly how you want the table to look, set it up here. It makes it much easier. However, if you neglect to do that, and then you discover later on that you need grouping and summary, you can still do that, and I'll show you how you would, do that after the fact. And then there's a table options tab that allows you to specify some, some other things here. One of the more useful things is this option called Show Summary Only. This is useful in a case where you have a grouping like this, like I just had set up a second ago. Right, so if you set up some grouping and summarization, you can select Show Summary Only, and what that will do is it will suppress all of the detail information in the table. Right, so instead of seeing each individual order listed in the table, you're just going to see a list of the categories and the totals for the categories. And in many cases, that's very, very useful. In this case, we're doing a detail table, so I'm not going to do that. So basically all I did, even though I talked a lot about this, really all I did is just selected a list of columns, and then I can press Finish. All right, and because I'm still in live edit mode, it actually shows me the entire table in my design view here, right? So here's the detail table. It goes on for a large number of pages. Was it maybe 100 pages or something, 132 pages? So so I've got this very long table. If I was looking at this in metadata mode, which in many cases might be more useful, turn off the live edit mode, right? So then it would just look like this, right? It would have a header row, and it would have a detail row, right? It's a detail table. It's only got a detail row. There's no summary row. There's no group row. And that's it. Okay, so so we're almost done actually with the example, because this is basically what that example is. It's just the details, right? Plus a highlight and a table style. So the table style is easy. I think we looked at that last time. If you want to apply a global style to the table, you right-click on the table, select Properties, and then you select the Select Style button down here, and you can choose from a bunch of different predefined styles. Find something that you like, maybe something like this. If you don't see one that you like here, you can actually create your own table styles, or you can style a table in a kind of ad hoc manner, which I'll just remind you about in a second. But I guess most typically you would select a table style, press OK, press OK. Right, so now that table has a style, and if I preview this, right, so there's the table style applied to the table, which is kind of similar to what the example used. Now you can also style a table in an ad hoc manner. So for example, if you want to set the background of a particular column, you would select a cell in that column and then go to the Format tab at the bottom, and you could set for example, the background of that cell. Right, so now that cell has a yellow background, and if you take a look at the table, right, so all the cells in that column have a yellow background. So that's just an example of ad hoc styling, and you can use that approach, basically selecting the particular cell or the particular region of the table that you want to style, and then just applying styles, either from the Format tab at the bottom or from the toolbar at the top. Adjust the font, the alignment, etc. That's just kind of ad hoc styling, in contrast to the global styling that you get when you use a table style, which we did first. So let me undo that, my little ad hoc styling there, and let's just go ahead and do the highlight. Now, as far as I can tell from the example, I don't remember what highlight we originally applied when we did this example in 2014, but it looks like I'm highlighting New Jersey and New York, so I'm just going to do that highlight really quick. If you want to highlight an individual cell, in other words, if you want that highlight formatting to appear on a cell, like let's say just on the state cell, then you would just select the state cell in that column, that one cell, and then go to the highlight tab at the bottom and proceed to define the highlight. If you want the highlight to apply to the entire row when the condition is met, then what you would do is you would select the entire row by clicking in the left margin next to the row. So that selects the entire row. Right? I just clicked in the left margin, selects the entire row, and now I can proceed to define the highlight. So I'll press the New button. I'll say, give it a name of NJ or NY. I'll set the background to this bright yellow color when the highlight condition is satisfied, and then press the Edit Condition button here, and the highlight condition is going to be that the state, customer state, is one of, and then I'll add New Jersey, add, and add New York. Add, append. All right, so customer state is one of NJ or NY. Press OK. Press Apply. There's this green Apply button here that often you need to press when you're doing a highlight. For other properties, you don't always need to press that Apply button, but for a highlight you do. And then if we preview this, then we'll see that we've got a highlight on every row where the customer state is New Jersey or New York. Okay, if there's any questions about that, again, feel free to ask. I should point out that for, unlike a dashboard, again, there are aspects of creating a table that are different in a report just because a report has this page metaphor, whereas a dashboard does not. And one example of that is the automatic table layout options. If you right-click on a table and go to Properties, there's a set of options over here like fit page, fit content, equal width, fit content and page. These are automatic table sizing options, which you can choose to use or not. The documentation explains, what they do. But for example, fit content would squeeze the table down so it's just large enough to contain its contents, right? So if I select that guy, press OK, and do a preview, you can see that there's a slight difference now, right? It's not using the full page anymore. Rather, it's basically squashed so that every column is as small as it can possibly get, right? So sometimes that's useful. In other cases, you may want to manually adjust the columns yourself. In that case, you would right-click, go to Properties, and select Manual Column Widths. And in that case, then what you do is you just drag the columns to make them the sizes that you want, right? So these are options. Which is basically the way that you would size a table if you were doing a dashboard. In that case, it's all manual sizing. But my point is that because of the page metaphor that you have in a report, you do have these other automatic sizing options, which in many cases come in handy. Okay, let's just take a look at adding grouping to this table, because right now what we have is a purely detail table, right? There's no grouping at all in this table. Now I said that generally if you know that you're going to want grouping in your table, the easiest way to do that is to set up that grouping when you're using the wizard. The problem is that if you already created the table, you can't go back to the wizard, right? So either you could start again, in other words, you could blow away that table, or leave it there and then start over, and of course you can add another table, click the table, go to the wizard, and this time you could go to grouping and summary, set up the grouping, and basically start over from scratch. But you don't have to do that, because you can add grouping and summary even to an existing table like this. And the way that you would do it is by using these options that appear in the actually, let me see if there it is. Right, so if you right-click, there's a plus icon in the left margin of the table. And what I want to do here is I want to add a grouping row and a summary row, right? Because basically what I want to do is I want to group by category and then aggregate the totals category by category, right? So what I would do is I click on that plus button, right? And you can see that there's some options here: insert group header, insert group footer, right? So sometimes you want both a header and a footer. Sometimes you just want the header, sometimes just the footer. In this case, I'll just say insert group, and that will give me both a group header and a group footer, which right now are blank. Right, so you can see I still got my detail row, but now I've got this grouping header and footer sandwiching the detail row. And so what I can do is if I want to group by category, I can just put product category in this grouping row here. So I can grab it from here, or I can copy and paste from here, either way. So let me find product category. I'll just find it in the data source here. So product category, put it in there. And if you take a look very closely, you can see that because I put this field into a grouping row, it's designated as a grouping field. There's a little icon. I don't even know what to call that icon. It looks like 3 lines. I think it might be a Greek letter. I'm not 100% sure. Anyway, it's a little icon that looks like 3 horizontal lines next to the field name. And you can also see if you hover over the field that there's this button here, this group button, which is pressed down. It looks like a capital E, right? And that's currently depressed, meaning that this field is going to be grouped. Right? And that happened automatically because I put it into the grouping row that I created. If I want to aggregate the product total, I can do the same thing down here in the group footer. I can find the product total field, drag it in down here, and because this is in a group footer, it's going to automatically be set to aggregate the product total. Right? So you can see there, there's a sigma, capital sigma, that indicates that that field is being aggregated. So this is how you would add grouping and aggregation after the fact. Let's take a look at what this looks like. Right, so if I do a preview of this, you can see that I still have all of the detail records, right? I still have that detail row, which is being expanded to show me all of the individual detail records, but now I have this grouping field up here. And if I, if I scroll through this or page through this report far enough, eventually I'll get to the next group, All right, oh, so there it was. There was the transition. All right, so I'm still in the group of business, and here I get to the end of that group of business, and here you can see that the aggregated total for that group is 8 million something. All right, so there's that. This row is being produced by that GF1 or group footer 1 row, and then it begins the next group, the group educational. Here's the group header, right? And then if I page forward far enough, I'll get to the end of that group eventually. Right, so there it was. All right, so that group ends down here. There's the summary for that group, and so on. All right, then it moves on to the next group. So I've introduced grouping into this table. Now there are different things that you could do. For example, you might want to introduce a page break after each group. You might want the summary on the same row as the group title. You might want to format that row in a different way. All these things are fairly easy to do. I'm just going to give you a hint at some of them. So for example, if you want to break after each group, what you can do is you can go down to the, it's either the data or the option tab. Let's see, option. Right, so there's an option tab at the bottom. There's an option here, new page before. Right, so I selected that product category group cell. Right, if I select new page before, that means that each time it hits a new group, it will introduce a page break. So that can be, kind of handy. So let's just take a look at what that, ends up being. All right, so I'm going to go back at page 1 here, and let me just page forward to the end of the business group, which is, oh, there it was. All right, so when it gets to the end of the business group, so there's the sum total for, product total for business, and then a page break, right? Right, so it breaks a page, starts the next group on the next page, right? So that's just an example of introducing a page break. Let's say that I wanted the aggregated total on the same row as the group label, right, which is this GH1 row. Well, what I can do is I can just, copy it from here. I'll just do, or cut it from there and paste it up over here. Paste, right, and I'll just double check, make sure that it's still set to be an aggregating field, right? So I see that the sigma button there is still pressed. The sigma symbol is still there, right? So that it basically just moved it from over there to up here. And if I take a look at this now, I'll see that the aggregated total appears on the same line as the group label, right? So that maybe is a little bit handy. And you could do a whole bunch of other things. If you wanted to format that row differently, make that bold or something, you could select that row and make it, bolder and larger and whatever, to, make it more apparent that that's, I selected the entire row and then used the buttons in the toolbar, and so now you get that the grouping row is, large and bold and so on. So you can do all these different kinds of ad hoc formatting to distinguish the grouping row from the detail rows and so on. Last thing I just want to show you with this example is that you can delete the detail row entirely if you want. So if you decide, after all this, after creating your detail table, you decide that in fact the detail table is not really what you wanted, but in fact what you wanted was just a summary table. You only wanted the categories and the corresponding totals, and you don't care about the individual sales, you can just get rid of the detail row. So you can just click on that row, press the plus symbol, and select delete row. Right, that deletes the detail row, and of course we can also delete the GF1 row. There's no need to have that empty row there. So delete that row, and that leaves us with just the GH1 row, just our grouping row. And if we take a look at that result, it looks funny because we still have that page break, right? So we've got 7 pages, each group is on its own page. That doesn't make much sense. So what I would do is just come back here, back to option, turn off that new page before option, take a look at it again, and now we're back just to having a summary table. We've got these extra columns here which we can remove, but but that's basically just an illustration of creating a detail table and then adding grouping into that detail table after the fact. Okay, I'm almost at the end. Let me just see if I could do one more example really quickly, and then I'll take any questions. So I'm going to remove this example. And the last example of a table that I want to do, sorry we didn't get to do more tables, but I believe we'll probably be doing some more tables in future webinars. The last thing that I want to do is just a basic crosstab, just to illustrate how you would add a basic crosstab into a table. And this is pretty simple. It's got category as the row header, the year as the column header, and 2 measures. So let's go ahead and build this. Again, my preference, although you could do this by dragging a crosstab, a blank crosstab, into the dashboard, and then you get, you can use these fields over here. This is the crosstab editor. It's actually not that not that bad to do it this way, right? So you can, if you want the category, for example, category as the column header, as the row header, there's the category. If you want the year as the column header, right? So you find the date field, put it as the column header. Maybe it's easier to do this in live edit mode so you can see what's happening. I didn't add a measure yet, so it looks kind of awful, but if I want to throw a measure in there, like product total, add that into the aggregate field. This is actually not a bad way to build up a, crosstab. It's probably almost as easy as using the wizard, right? So you could do it this way. Let me just, since my preference is usually to use the wizard, I'm going to delete this and just do it using the wizard and show you it's about the same. So instead of doing it that way by first adding a blank crosstab and then using the crosstab editor to set it up, what I'll do is I'll click once on the crosstab component in the toolbox, and then I'll use the crosstab wizard over here. So again, and you'll see it's pretty much the same. Select the data source. Then instead of selecting columns over here, I'm going to jump across to the crosstab tab, and that just lets me set up the row headers and column headers and aggregate, which basically is everything that I want to do. So I'll select, again, product category here as the row header. This isn't really more or less work than the way that I just did it before, but category, the date field, if you need to change the grouping, you can change it here, but it's fine. We want to group by year. We want two measures. We want both the total and the quantity purchased. And then we want those measures to be side by side. And if you go to crosstab options, there is an option here, summary cell side by side. So you could select that now. But let me just illustrate what happens if we don't do that. So basically, I set this up the way that I want fundamentally, right? So I've got the row headers, the column headers, and the aggregates, and I'll just click finish, right? And that creates my basic crosstab. Now, this obviously doesn't look exactly like the picture, so let's, the picture is this one. So let's just make a few changes to get it to look like the picture, and you'll see that all of those settings that you can set in the wizard, you can also set after the fact. For example, I want to set the two measures to be side by side. What I would do is right-click on the crosstab, anywhere on the crosstab, select Properties. Whoops, sorry, my mistake. Right-click, select Options, not Properties, Options. And here I can set these different properties, same as I could in the wizard, summary cell side by side. And I also want to select show summary headers because I want it to label the two measures, total and quantity purchased, right? So show summary headers also, press OK. All right, so this gets it into a better configuration for us. You'll notice that the quantity purchased header, the measure label over here, is too big really to display nicely. So it's basically going onto two rows. It stretches out this column, doesn't look so great. What I can do is I can change that. However, if I click on that, on any of those column headers, the measure label, if I click on it and start typing, it will give me a warning that says the cell is not editable. Right? That means that I can't change the text in that cell. So what do I do? In fact, it tells me twice. It's so excited about that. So what do? I can always use a text format. Right? So if I go down to the format panel at the bottom, recall that there's this thing called a text format that allows you basically to replace, and it works not only for tables. The text format is available also for charts and for text elements, and this basically allows you to replace the text in an element or to add a prefix or a suffix. It has a special symbol, a zero in curly braces represents the value in the cell, and then you can add either a suffix or a prefix. But one of the things that you can also do with the text format is just remove the text in the cell completely by not using that zero in curly braces and just replace it with some other text. So in this case, I just want to replace that text. Instead of saying quantity purchased, I'll just have it say amount, right? And the text format that I set here, if I don't use that zero in curly brace, it will just replace the text that was formerly in that cell. Right, so now I've got total and amount, and the rest of everything is really just formatting. Right, you can apply a table style to a crosstab, just like you can do with a regular table. Right, so if you go to Properties, you've got the Select Style button here. You can choose a table style. In this case, I think it's all done just by ad hoc formatting. So I'm just going to do it that way. Right, so I'm going to select these cells and just make those give those kind of a brown border. sorry, a gray background there, and a gray background for these guys. I'm just selecting the individual cells, and I'm doing this formatting just on an ad hoc basis. I'm looking at a picture that I have printed out, so in case you're wondering how I'm remembering what it's supposed to look like. So, right, so just, this kind of gray surround, and then we've got over here this, these guys are going to be turquoise background. So I don't have turquoise, right? So that I'll just use that color. And then there's also a grand total. Now, right now we don't have a grand total, so how do we get that grand total row? Well, what I can do is right-click. Hopefully I can get it from options. Let's take a look. Show row grand total, right? So here I right-clicked, I selected options, I can specify show row grand total. There it is, and if I want, I can format this in a different way, maybe make it larger or something like this, and format these guys differently. And I think you get the idea that you can, then if you want to also, give it some different kind of style. So I think at this point you get the idea that this is basically creating a crosstab is pretty straightforward. And you can do it either using the wizard, which is would be my preference for initially setting up a crosstab, or it's pretty much just as easy if you just add a blank crosstab just to hook it up using the binding panel here in the crosstab editor. Okay, I'm going to stop talking because I went 5 or 6 minutes overtime already. So we didn't get to this last one, but I think we're going to have a much more in-depth webinar, like I said, on formula tables later on, so I don't feel too badly about that. So I'll stop talking. Let me see if there are any questions that anybody wants to chat me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Well, oh, there's a question, perhaps. Can you set details, as a question, can you set details into certain order? Okay, if you want to sort, okay. So let's go back to a detail table and let's see. I should be able to do that. So I'm just going to create a detail table below this crosstab down here. So I shouldn't have deleted the one that I made before, but I'll just make another detail table. Let me just choose a few. I'll just choose company, category, let's say date, and product total, just something very simple. Okay, so let's see. If you're using the wizard, there's a sort option here, right? So you can sort multiple columns. So for example, let's say I wanted to sort this by category, right? So over here I would press the sort button, right? And there's a little arrow that appears, an upward pointing arrow for ascending sort order. Press it again for descending sort order, right? So you can sort multiple columns that way. If you don't do it here, right? So if you don't sort over here, let's see after the fact how we would do it. All right, so I'll press finish, and that gives me my detail table. There it is. Let me get back to the beginning. So if I want to sort after the fact, let's see. See if I remember how to sort after the fact. Look at that. There's actually a sorting option. So I'm going to right-click on the table, select sorting, and then that allows me to sort individual columns. So I can, I'm guessing I can click over there. So you click on the icon to the left of the column. So if I want to sort on first name, I click that guy, click it once for ascending, click it again for descending, click it a third time to remove the sort, and likewise for any other column. So that's how you would control the sort order after the fact if you've already completed the wizard. Okay, any other questions on anything, charts or tables? Okay. I'll stay online. I know some of you are probably itching to go offline, or may have already, for all I know. So those of you who need to jump off, thanks very much for joining. Really appreciate it, and I hope to see you back next month again. And have a nice weekend. Anybody who's still typing a question, don't be alarmed. I will stay online for another 30 seconds or so to see if a question pops up. But those of you who are taking off, be well and have a nice weekend. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Okay, and it looks like everyone has left. If anybody else wants to ask a question, just let me know. Maybe send me a partially formed chat. Let me know that you're still typing. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off over here. Okay. All right. Thanks very much. Signing off.